Hello, welcome to the lecture of Module 4 about materials development. If you can remember from the previous lecture, namely the principles of lesson planning in Module 2, material is a vital component of a lesson plan. That's the point that we're going to discuss in this module. Before we start the lecture, let's think about these statements. The first one, materials should be developed for teaching rather than for learning. The second statement, in most language classrooms throughout the world, most lessons are still based on materials. Number 3, some course books can meet the needs and wants of every or even any class. Number 4, materials need to be written in such a way that the teacher can make use of them as a resource and not have to follow them as a script. Statement number 5. The teachers should provide many opportunities for the learners to produce language in order to achieve intended outcomes. Now, can you decide whether these above statements are true or false? You know the answers when we finish this lecture. In this lecture, there are two main parts we're gonna focus on. The first one is about materials. We'll define the teaching materials, discuss the features of good materials, authentic and non-authentic materials. And the last is the advantages and disadvantages of authentic materials. You know, the second part is about materials development. For the second part, I'm going to introduce you the definition, the importance, and principles of materials development. Now, we start with the first part of the lecture, teaching materials. First of all, we'll discuss the definition of materials. Actually, there are more than one way for us to define what teaching materials are. However, in this lecture, I'll show you some common definitions supported by a lot of teachers and linguistics. You know, according to Tomlinson, materials are anything which can be used to facilitate the learning of a language, including course books, videos, graded readers, flashcards, games, websites, and mobile phone interactions. Well, you know, materials can be informative because they are used for informing the learners about the target language. They can be instructional as well because they guide the learners in practicing the language, or experiential as they provide the learners with experience of the language in use. Materials can also be eliciting as they encourage the learners to use the language. And they can be exploratory as they help the learners to make discoveries about the language. One more thing is to remember is that materials should be developed for learning rather than for teaching. So now, you are clear about the definition of teaching materials, right? We'll move on with the features of good materials. I believe that when attending this lecture, you all wonder whether the materials you are using are good or not. So, if they have the following qualities, we'd consider them good. First of all, they expose the learners to language in authentic use. They help learners to pay attention to features of authentic input. Or they provide the learners with opportunities to use the target language to achieve communicative purposes. They also provide opportunities for outcome feedback. What's more, they sustain the learner's curiosity and attention. Last, they stimulate intellectual, aesthetic, and emotional involvement. Well, these teaching materials are often classed as either authentic or non-authentic, depending on their origin and how they're used. Well, you can see authentic materials refer to items that have not been designed or adapted for use in an English language classroom, such as newspapers, magazines, video clips, and sound lyrics. In contrast, non-authentic materials refer to anything that has been designed specifically to aid the teaching process, such as worksheets, textbooks, and instructional CDs or DVDs. In this module, we'll focus on the use of authentic materials in language teaching. You see, the definitions of authentic materials are slightly different in literature. But what is common in this definition is exposure to real language and its use in its own community. Rogers defines it as appropriate and quality in terms of goals, objectives, learners' needs, and interests, and natural in terms of real life and meaningful communication. Or Harmer, cited in Matsuda, defines authentic texts as materials which are designed for native speakers. They are real texts, designed not for language students, but for the speakers of the language. According to Jobin, authentic texts are texts that are not written for language teaching purposes. Authentic materials are significant since it increases the students' motivation for learning, makes the learner be exposed to the real language, as discussed by Garanto and Molly. Alright, now once you have known the definition of authentic and non-authentic materials clearly, I'll show you the advantages and disadvantages of authentic materials. And let's discuss the advantages first. You know, according to Michon, the richness of content generates a positive environment, especially for motivation and engagement in language learning. In a second language setting, authentic texts provide the best sources of rich and very comprehensible input for language learners. Michon also believed that the elaborate change to a text enrich lucidity better than their simplification, and they have impact on affective factors indispensable for learning, such as motivation, empathy, and emotional involvement. Well, you know, authentic materials generate students' motivation and interest. They are used to enable learners to communicate and interact socially in the target language environment. And they integrate learning value as well. Moreover, the authentic materials stimulate the whole brain processing, which can result in more durable learning. Actually, they keep students informed about what is happening in the world, so they have an intrinsic educational value. Besides, textbooks often do not include incidental or improper English according to Martinez. Well, the other advantage is that language change is reflected in the materials, so that students and teachers can keep abreast of such changes. Martinez also stated that books, articles, newspapers, etc. contain a wide range of text styles, language styles, not easily found in traditional teaching materials. And authentic ones produce a sense of achievement. For example, a brochure on England given to students to plan a 4-day visit. What's more, materials are constantly updated and topical thanks to authentic materials. They provide authentic cultural information and help to relate more closely to learners' needs. In terms of the disadvantages of authentic materials, they contain difficult language, unneeded vocabulary items, and complex language structures. Therefore, they cause a burden for the teacher in lower-level classes. Moreover, they may be too culturally biased and too many structures are mixed, so they cause lower levels to have a hard time decoding the text. Authentic materials tend to clearly lack grammatical accuracy, acquisition order, or durability of learning, according to Michon. They do not fit into the systematized language syllabus, and too culturally biased, unnecessarily difficult to understand outside the language community. The other disadvantage of authentic materials is, first, too many structures are mixed, so lower levels have a hard time decoding the text. A listening is tough with too many different accents. Materials can become easily obsolete, and design of the materials is a complex task. They can be difficult to find interesting and accessible materials for beginners level. The copyright issues can be a concern as well. Alright, carelessly chosen materials can be extremely demotivating for learners since they will find it difficult. And deciding the authenticity of materials is not easy, according to Homer. Or Richardson case used to think that texts are usually too high level. So that's the end of the first mini lecture of Module 4. See you later in the next mini lecture. Goodbye.